In many of the modules, purge programs exist that purge data from the system. In other words, delete records from the system and move them to either a history table or actually delete them totally from the system. If we go into the distribution menu, to inventory, and into file purges, we can see we have an inventory file purge and unstocked expired lot purge. We'll go into the inventory file purge, and we can find that there's 5 tables here that have purges: the receipt data, adjustments, interwarehouse transfer, movement, and issues. If the purges are run on this screen, this data is purged from the system. It does not go into a history table and is no longer exists. Now if we leave here and go back into the financial area, accounts receivable, file purges, there's a file purge for paid in full invoices and a history purge. If we ran the accounts receivable paid in full purge and report, we would be purging data from the accounts receivable invoice table to the accounts receivable history table. This is a purge of paid invoices, and that data will be moved into a history table, which is a more abbreviated form of the invoice information. If we exit here, if we do the history purge, now we're purging the accounts receivable history table, and once this is done, the data pertaining to the invoices will no longer exist on the system. It is important to keep this in mind when running purges, that in some circumstances the data in a purge program will be purged totally from the system and will not exist in any historical tables. And in some cases, like the AR purge, the data will be purged to a history table, and then when the history purge is run, then the data no longer exists in the system. So you might want to keep this in mind when running purges, as to check the documentation or listen to the tutorials for the purge to find out whether or not the data is purged to a historical table. We recommend when running a purge in circumstances where the data will be purged totally from the system to take a backup of the tables at that time, either a system-wide backup or the specific tables, in case in the future you would need to go back to that data. Or also run hard copies of reports so that you can keep in your archives these reports in case you ever had to reference to this data again. Although it's a very good idea not to purge unless you're sure that you would not need to be looking at the data again. So if you take accounts receivable, for example, you may not want to run the history purge until you have maybe 3 years worth of data in there. So this concludes the discussion of accounts receivable and all other purges.